Hi, everyone. I'm Eve Samples, Executive Director at Friends of the Everglades. Welcome to our pre-session review of what's to come in Tallahassee. The state legislative session starts tomorrow. For 60 days, we will be buckled up to see what bills are coming down the pike. My colleague here, Gil Smart, who is Policy Director at Friends of the Everglades, has been fast and furiously tracking bills along with our Science and Policy Analyst, Mitchell Latzman, and our whole team at Friends of the Everglades. I first want to thank the Tierney and Wetzel Foundation for sponsoring this live session and our legislative accountability work. We've really ramped this up over the last 4 years or so. We understand that people who live in South Florida or elsewhere in Florida may not have the time or bandwidth to track what's happening in Tallahassee during session, but it has a very direct impact on our lives and the environment, not only across the greater Everglades, but across Florida. So we want to make it easy for you to stay informed, to stay engaged, which is why we do these live stream events before session, at the middle of session, and at the end of session. We'll come back to tell you what's happened. So I want to welcome our audience who's tuned in live. If you're watching live on Facebook or on any other platform, you can actually type comments into the chat and we can see those. You can ask your questions there, and we'll spend the last 15 minutes or so of our time together here answering as many of those as we can. There is a lot to talk about this legislative session already, even though it hasn't officially started yet. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about what's happening in Tallahassee, and then Gil is going to dig into some of the nitty-gritty here. So generally speaking, we have played a lot of defense in Tallahassee, not just Friends of the Everglades, but the many environmental allies we have up there. Florida Springs Council, Thousand Friends of Florida, so many other folks are up there doing great work week in, week out, during session and before session. Now, last year, some of you who have really been paying attention might recall that we also scored on offense. We managed to get a positive state parks protection bill passed. We closed loopholes that were in original drafts of that bill. So we want to build on that momentum and score on offense more in Tallahassee. That said, as Gil is going to tell you, we actually have quite a bit of defense to play this year. So a little bit about the dynamics at play. Governor DeSantis is entering his final year in office, so there's arguably some lame duck status going on there. The House of Representatives in Tallahassee has shown it's willing to buck him, at least on some topics. So even though there's a super majority of Republicans in the state legislature, we have I don't want to say two-party dynamics because it's one party, but there's some conflict at play there that can actually create more robust debates. And to some degree, that helped during the state parks battle last session. Property tax reform is looming in the background now. There's a desire to change the way property taxes are implemented across Florida's counties. There's been even some talk of doing away with property taxes, which could have really dire impacts on environmental issues. So that's in the background. I want to make you aware of that. And also redistricting is swirling around. The governor has talked about a special session, proposed a special session at the end of the 60-day session to address new districts. We'll see if that happens or not. And finally, it's really worth underscoring that behind all of this that's percolating at the state level is a pretty dramatic gutting of environmental protections at the federal level. And we need to make sure that every environmental protection on the books in Florida is maintained and that they're strengthened where we can achieve that. So that's what's going on. We're in the thick of it all. Gil, I'm going to turn it over to you to cue up our presentation here.
All right. Give me 1 second here. Leah, do you have it that you're able to pull it up?
Leah is behind the scenes, and our multimedia producer here, Leah Voss, some of you may have met her out in the field, and she's going to cue up our slideshow.
There it is. All right. So you'll see sprawl on steroids, images of sprawl. A couple years ago, 2023 session, there were so many pro-development bills that those of us in the environmental community dubbed it the session of sprawl. This year, it's the session of sprawl on steroids. I've been doing this for several years now. I have never seen so many bills out there designed pro-development, quote unquote, bills designed to streamline the permitting process, cut local governments out, reduce their authority, cut local citizens out of the planning process. It's stunning the number of bills that have been filed this year. We're going to get to a few of them here. But let's start off with this again. The legislative session begins tomorrow, January 13th, terminates 60 days later on Friday, March 13th. There on the right, you'll see Ben Albritton. He's the Senate president. Daniel Perez is the House Speaker. It's going to be an interesting session. The legislature's been meeting in committee weeks now for several months, filing bills, having some initial hearings on bills. So some of this bad stuff is already moving. To reiterate our legislative priorities, which are articulated on our website, our number one priority remains rescuing the river of grass, securing additional land to really curtail discharges and rehydrate the Everglades National Park and Florida Bay. We want to protect wetlands. We want to take bold steps to improve water quality, smarter controlled development. We got the opposite going on this year, and stop sugarcane burning. Again, we're building on our 2025 successes. Last year was, if those of you who are following this issue, it was a huge deal. The plan to develop our state parks. We and other organizations and other people fought back. Last year, we got some legislation to protect our state parks. It just goes to show you, if you put your nose to the grindstone, you really can get some stuff done. And a lot of people did, and we got stuff done.
Let me jump in on that one, Gil, real quick before we move on. I think what was so effective last year was two things. People turned out when the state parks threat first emerged. That was actually back in 2024, and we managed to shut down that threat with major help from people like Jessica Namath, the Florida State Parks Facebook group she started, and not just online advocacy, but in-person advocacy, and also people calling lawmakers, emailing lawmakers. And then that resulted in a proposed bill that was drafted that had some pretty gaping loopholes in it that we worked with other advocacy organizations to help close. And we had some sponsors who were willing to work with us, like Representative John Snyder. We're grateful for that. And then that improved bill passed unanimously in the legislature. So a real success story that's worth underscoring, because we don't get a lot of those in Tallahassee on the environmental front. So let's keep that top of mind as we look at all this defense we have to play this year.
Well, and one thing to note too is that one aide to a legislator flat out told us that they got more phone calls on the state parks issue than they'd gotten on any other issues ever. And that includes hot button social issues like abortion. So it goes to show you that when people put pressure on lawmakers, the lawmakers can respond, and they're definitely in tune. If their phone starts blowing up, if their email inbox starts blowing up with people like you who are watching us, voicing your, support or opposition to certain things, it gets noticed, and it did get noticed, and that led to a win on the state parks. So we're very happy with that. Eve, if you want to talk a little bit about this here.
Sure. So some of you might be tuned in and maybe are new followers of Friends of the Everglades because of our lawsuit against Alligator Alcatraz, which was filed last summer. And I just want to explain the intersection of that legal battlefront, which is continuing with our state legislative advocacy. There is an intersection. So this detention center in the heart of the Everglades continues to operate, continues to harm the Everglades every single day. And it emerged as the result of an idea by State Attorney General James Meyer, who debuted the idea for a detention center in the heart of the Everglades on a cable news network. The state didn't do any environmental review, didn't take public input, didn't consider alternatives that could have been less damaging. More than 20 acres of new pavement has been laid out there. And we filed suit last summer under the National Environmental Policy Act, which is a bedrock environmental law that requires the government to look before it leaps and to consider those alternatives and take public input. None of that happened before Alligator Alcatraz was built. We had a major initial success last summer, last August. We secured an injunction that halted new activity at the site for 2 weeks. And then the appeals court paused that injunction while the appeal is pending. We're actually going to be back in court in April on this front. So, Gil walked us through our legislative priorities, responsible development, protecting wetlands, rescuing the river of grass. This project is a direct affront to those priorities. and is a continuing issue. It's also very near and dear to our hearts and our origin story at Friends of the Everglades. That runway you see in this picture was actually the first runway that was built as part of the proposed Everglades jetport back in 1969. It's the reason Marjorie Stoneman Douglas founded Friends of the Everglades. Back then, it would have been the largest airport in the world. We stopped that development before the rest of the airport was built, and it's been a lightly used training runway ever since, until last summer when Alligator Alcatraz was constructed on this site, and it's causing very damaging impacts through lighting, again, that new asphalt that was laid out there, and a total lack of environmental review that's in compliance with NEPA. So worth keeping in mind that this is continuing. It's still an issue, and while there's no bills pending in Tallahassee to address it, it's very much at the cross section of our work.
Okay, very good. Thank you. All right, let's go talk about some of these bills in line with our legislative priorities. Our first priority is rescuing the river of grass. There is a bill, two bills, a companion bill, Senate Bill 1120, House Bill 701, titled Water Management Districts. These bills are a bit of a retread from bills that were proposed last year and did not make it to the finish line. They're slightly different, but a major provision in this requires the South Florida Water Management District, as well as the DEP, to provide detailed reporting, including total estimated cost of the implementation of CERP, that's the Comprehensive Everglades Restoration Plan, status of all applicable performance indicators for all project components. Basically, this is the legislature saying, where are we at on CERP? How much have we spent on this? How much do we need to spend? Where are the projects in the pipeline or in the process? What's going on? So in one respect, it's fine. There's been a bit of bureaucratic impatience, I think, with the relatively slow pace of CERP. It's been 25 years since CERP was passed, and there's still a lot yet to be done. A lot of progress has been made in recent years, but this is the legislature basically saying, how much longer is this going to be? There's another aspect to this bill, too. Authorizes water management districts to levy certain ad valorem taxes, but requires the district governing board levying ad valorem taxes for certain projects to adopt a resolution that must be approved by a majority vote of electors in the district. So in other words, if water management districts want to levy a tax to fund a program or a proposal, they got to go to the voters and see if the voters are going to sign off on it. So these bills would have additional requirements for water management districts, accountability, and I guess you could say call accountability in terms of projects they want to fund, but they need the public's permission to do so.
Yeah, this one could have major implications for Everglades restoration. As you said, Gil, the South Florida Water Management District includes 16 counties, and that water management district is the state partner on Everglades restoration. Everglades restoration is a state-federal partnership. So the South Florida Water Management District leads Everglades restoration projects on behalf of the state. And if this requirement is triggered where any ad valorem tax changes have to go to voters for approval, what does that mean for Everglades restoration funding? We don't know. We have a lot of questions about this bill, and we know that the work of Everglades restoration is not done. Water quality is still a major question mark. There's some important deadlines coming up on phosphorus limits for the Everglades, and our work is far from done.
Right. Okay. All right. Next up, priority protecting wetlands. We come to what may be the single worst bill filed this legislative session. This is land and water management, Senate Bill 718, House Bill 479. I'm told someone else in the conservation community is calling this bill the I Hate Clean Water Bill. So that's actually be a good name for it. As you can see, prohibits local governments from adopting their own rules on water quality or quantity, pollution control, or wetlands, preempts all authority to the state. This bill, you'll see it's Senator Stan McClain, and remember that name, we're going to come back to him, and Rep. Randy Maggard. Maggard actually filed a version of this bill last year. It went nowhere. The fact that it didn't have a Senate sponsor for a companion Senate bill. This year it does, and McClain's a pretty powerful guy. So this one we definitely have to keep watching. Essentially, it says local governments may not make and implement local government environmental regulation. Only the state can do that.
This is outrageous, Gil. It was outrageous last year. It's outrageous this year. We continue to see Senator McLean and Rep. Maggard's names on these bad bills that would harm water in our state. And it is arguably a conservative principle to let the government closest to home make decisions like this, right?
Well, right. Right. And in addition, I mean, there are, one size fits all does not fit Florida when it comes to the environment. Different communities are facing different issues. And again, the local government closest to the people is more in tune with exactly what the community wants and the community needs and what sort of protections ought to be implemented to protect the things the community values. Bills like this just kill all of that. And that's why we oppose it. And a lot of other organizations oppose it as well. If this starts to move, you will see a battle royale over this one because this is terrible.
I got one more thought on this before you move on. We're headquartered in Martin County, Friends of the Everglades is. We were in Miami-Dade County for many years. And in Martin County, people deeply care about wetlands protections. We have some of the most rigorous wetlands protections in the state of Florida. We saw this happen in Manatee County recently, right, where there was a debate over wetlands protections at the county commission level, and the public responded resoundingly. And this bill looks like an attempt to undercut counties that decide through their electorate that they want to prioritize these kinds of protections more, and to have Tallahassee undercut that ability of the local government to make that decision just defies logic.
Yes, yeah, but Tallahassee often defies logic. So.
I like what you said. That. The I hate clean water bill.
I love it. I love it. It's perfect. Yeah. Make some T-shirts and see if we can get people to wear them. So. All right. But, we don't want to just accentuate all the negative. There's a good bill. This is another version of a bill that was filed last year. This year, it's by Senator Ana Maria Rodriguez, Rep. Peggy Gossett-Seidman. And we support this bill. It basically authorizes the Florida Department of Health to adopt and enforce rules for public health, safety, and welfare around public bathing places like a beach, pool, that sort of thing. Local governments in the state must issue health advisories within specified timeframes if water quality doesn't meet standards. When dangerous conditions are detected, local governments must close affected beach waters and bathing places. So this doesn't do much to address the source of, why are these places fouled, but it does go farther than current state law to say, look, the government has an obligation to warn people, to tell people, and to force the closure of these places until the problem is cleaned up. So it's a public health measure. It's a clean water measure. We support it.
It's surprising this hasn't passed during past sessions. Any theory on that, Gil?
It came fairly close last session. There was some support for it out there. It just sort of died at the end of the session. So hopefully we're going to see. This is kind of a no-brainer. This is a common sense measure. Why would you oppose this? Hopefully we won't see opposition to it, and it'll pass this year. All right. But there's other water quality related bills that are bad, as you already know. Golf courses is an interesting one. It would characterize golf as an agricultural activity, citing the foundational agricultural nature of golf, whatever that means. But what the upshot is that if it's agriculture in nature, that why then the best management practices that golf courses have to take, that should be overseen by the Department of Agriculture instead of the DEP, which is currently the case. This is possibly because the Department of Agriculture isn't quite as strict and quite as stringent in cracking down as DEP may tend to be. So this is something we're keeping an eye on. We oppose it. The idea that golf is an agricultural activity is ludicrous on its face. But if that's the reason we're labeling it as such, just to sort of sneak out from under the heavier hand of regulation, that's a bogey right there. So another one here too, Senate Bill 698, House Bill 589, on-site sewage treatment and disposal permits. It prohibits local governments from requiring property owners to get a DEP permit for a septic system as a condition of issuing a building or plumbing permit. Instead, they got to prove that they've applied for the permit when they apply for the building and plumbing permit. Raises the issue, what happens if DEP were to deny the permit? Does that mean that your building plumbing permit is also denied? It's just, once again, this is the tip of the iceberg, and we're going to get to the iceberg itself in a moment. this is the tip of the iceberg for what the overarching theme is this session, which is trying to do everything we can to knock down local regulation and enable construction to go forward quicker, more efficiently, and with less oversight.
Thanks, Gil. I'll take this moment to voice a public service announcement. If you're watching live, feel free to ask questions in the chat, and we will get to some of those at the end of our overview of the bills that have been filed this session.
Okay, and now smarter controlled development was our goal, our priority. No, more sprawl. Now we get to the meat of it. And we're going to list several bills here, but understand there are many more. We could literally take up this entire time talking about sprawl bills. It's ludicrous. It's ridiculous. Let's start with Senate Bill 588, House Bill 105. Local government enforcement actions. It prohibits local governments from taking enforcement actions deemed arbitrary or unreasonable. Allows the offended party to sue, like a developer, and get up to $50,000 in damages plus court costs. This is an obvious attempt to intimidate local governments from using their own rules, regulating the building community. And again, it's going to lead to local governments sort of taking a step back and saying, wait a minute, maybe we shouldn't be so tough, because we can get sued, that sort of thing. Again, it's an attempt to intimidate local governments, and local governments have a role, and this is trying to get them to step back from that role. Senate Bill 208, House Bill 399, land use and development regulations. Infill development must be administratively approved without a public hearing and treating as a conforming use if the development meets certain standards. This is one of numerous bills this session, which tries to cut the public out of the process by saying development proposals can be approved administratively, that is by staff, by local staff, instead of going to a public hearing where the public gets an opportunity to weigh in. It's got to be treated as a conforming use as well. Doesn't matter what the rule book says. The rules are being rewritten to say that if it checks certain boxes, then it has to be approved. Any legislation that basically says it must be approved, especially without the input of the public, is bad news and should be opposed.
Yes, again, undermining the power of local elected officials who have to answer to their constituents who they see at the grocery store or see around town, and allowing it's basically greasing the skids for more development across Florida.
Yep, and that's exactly what all these things are about. This is a doozy, this Blue Ribbon Project. Senate Bill 354, House Bill 299, creates a designation for projects of at least 10,000 acres, which, if it meets certain criteria, may override existing land use or zoning laws, and once again, must be approved administratively with no public input. Now think about this. You've got a project right down the street from where you live that's going to encompass 10,000 acres or more, maybe 20,000 acres. And if it checks certain boxes, you don't get a say at all in whether that project is approved. Your opinion is unnecessary and irrelevant, because as long as they check these boxes, they get its administrative approval with no public input. That's outrageous. And Floridians should not stand for that sort of thing. And hopefully they won't. Senate Bill 686, House Bill 691, agricultural enclaves. We saw a similar attempt at this last year. The drive to create agricultural enclaves last year stalled out at the last minute. This is reigniting it. Seeks to streamline the approval process for these agricultural enclaves, which are basically agricultural land that sort of sticks out like a sore thumb, maybe surrounded on a couple sides by development, that sort of thing. But it allows for development plans that meet certain criteria to, you guessed it, be approved administratively with no public input.
Yeah. And we are not against smart, responsible development at Friends of the Everglades. We and our allies like Thousand Friends of Florida, who do incredible work in this realm, we advocate for smart development that takes every reasonable step to protect our wetlands, to embrace sound planning practices. These two bills right here are the opposite of that. They would eliminate public input, and they could lead to really damaging sprawl that has direct impacts on the greater Everglades and clean water in Florida.
Absolutely. And again, and I think proponents of these bills would say, well, they are smart growth because some of these, these boxes that they have to check, for example, on the blue ribbon projects, 60% of the land has to be left in reserve. But what does reserve mean? Does reserve include golf courses, for example? So you tell me you're going to build a project, around a huge golf course, call it smart growth, and then get to shove it down the public's throat with no public input. Investigative reporter Jason Garcia had an interesting piece on this blue ribbon projects bill, talking about how a Manhattan-based firm that manages hedge funds, mutual funds, and other investment vehicles called Ruane Cunniff, it's behind an outfit that was founded to push bills in this bill in the legislature, among other. They've hired 20 lobbyists who've been quietly meeting with lawmakers in support of the legislation, which, if passed, could dramatically boost the value of the vast land holdings the firm has assembled in Florida over the past decade. So you've got some Manhattan hedge fund operator who bought up a lot of acreage in Florida, who wants to make as big of a buck off it as possible. And lo and behold, we get the blue ribbon projects bill.
Do you have the sponsor names handy on these bills, Gil?
It's Lauren Mello Representative Lauren Mello is the blue ribbon projects. The House sponsor, Senator Stan McClain, is the sponsor of Senate Bill 354.
Thank you. It's important for us to know the names of people who are pushing these proposals. So if you're in their district, you can call them, or even if you're outside their district, those in-district calls really make a difference. And
please check everglades.org, our legislative accountability, link to the legislative accountability page from there, because we are going to have our entire list of bills that we're watching. We can't possibly, in this live stream, list every single bill that we oppose, we're watching, that sort of thing. But we have the entire list on our website, and it includes who sponsors each one, related bills, all sorts of good info. So if you're interested, go to our website and you can find that info. Okay. And then Senate Bill 948, House Bill 1143, Local Government Land Development Regulations and Orders, creates the Florida Starter Homes Act, which basically prohibits local governments from enacting land development rules like design standards, minimum lot sizes, other restrictions that regulate lots unless the rules satisfy specific requirements. And basically, once again, here's an effort to neuter local government oversight and just basically say, as long as we check all these boxes, you've got to approve these things. So you've heard us mention Senator Stan McClain on several occasions here. He is the common factor behind all of these sprawl bills I just listed, along with several others as well. McClain is a Republican who represents District 9, which is Levy and Marion counties and part of Alachua County. He chairs the important Community Affairs Committee in the Senate, which is or will be the first committee of reference for most, if not all, of these bills. So here's a guy, and he's a developer. In real life, he's a developer. So here's a guy who has proposed some of a huge amount of really, really consequential bills that would literally change the way Florida develops and give a lot of more leverage to the building community. And he chairs a committee that's going to hear these things. So, this blitzkrieg, this onslaught of pro-development legislation looks like it could even pick up steam depending on how these things go. So
I like how you said in real life he's a developer, as if Tallahassee in the legislature is not real life. Listen, it does get a little surreal.
All right. Here, this one is one we've been watching too. And once again, shout out to Jason Garcia for his excellent reporting on this issue. This is Big Sugar's favorite bill, Senate Bill 290, House Bill 433. These are being called the Florida Farm Bill. The bills aren't identical, but they're all inspired, apparently, by Agricultural Commissioner Wilton Simpson. There's a lot to these bills. This is hardly the only provision, but what caught our eye was a provision that could curtail the free speech rights of those who criticize Florida's sugar industry. So right now, Florida has what's called a food libel law. You are not allowed to unfairly disparage perishable agricultural food products, or they can come after you. Well, these bills would change the law, would enact the same protections for non-perishable products like sugar, and would expand the definition of agricultural food product to include farming practices like burning the sugarcane fields prior to harvest. Again, this would allow the industry to go after critics, to sue them, to be able to collect, I believe, up to $50,000 in damages. Once again, it's an attempt to intimidate critics of the industry, and particularly those who have criticized sugarcane burning, which is, includes the media, includes a lot of organizations, including Friends of the Everglades. So this bill is bad news. There's some good stuff in there, that don't have to do with this aspect that just needs to come out.
Yeah, and I'll just add, Gil, that there are very factual, legitimate reasons to be concerned about the health impacts of sugarcane burning. So there are about 400,000 acres of sugarcane south of Lake Okeechobee in the Everglades agricultural area, and the vast majority of that acreage is burned prior to harvest every single year. There is an 8-month-long burn cycle, and those burns are permitted when the winds are blowing toward the Glades communities, and they're less likely to be permitted when the winds are blowing toward the coastal communities. So there's a real disparity there and inequity. And last year I was out in the Glades having lunch in Belglade during burn season. I mean, it's the majority of the year, so it's kind of hard to go when it's not burn season. And I was in a restaurant for about 45 minutes and walked out, and my car was covered with ash, completely covered for 45 minutes. That's all it took. And there was no nearby burn. This burn was far away. And we know that the smoke and ash from these burns can travel up to 27 miles. So it's a real concern. And it's something that we need to get better on in Florida. Almost the entire country of Brazil has phased out sugarcane burning in favor of green harvesting, where the trash, as they call it, the vegetation around the cane stalk is mechanically removed. So there are better ways. And this bill, which Jason Garcia reported was requested by sugar, sure looks like an attempt to muffle the critics of this practice, this harmful practice.
Absolutely. The sugar industry, as I mentioned, has come in for a lot of criticism about this in recent years. There have been some really sort of in-depth, great investigative reporting done by the Palm Beach Post and some other outfits as well. So they've gotten a bit of a black eye as a result of that. This is obviously an attempt to quote unquote fix that, and to make it so that anybody who wants to report on these issues or advocate on these issues think twice, because they could take you to court, and they probably would. So definitely something we're keeping a very, very close eye on this.
Do you have the sponsor name handy on this one too, Gil?
I can look it up, and I will do so.
Yeah. Okay, sounds good.
Other bills we're watching. So you may remember, if you follow these issues, last year's legislative session got into a fight over auxiliary containers, bills that would preempt local governments from regulating auxiliary containers. Think takeout containers and stuff like that. This year, we've got dueling bills. The first set of bills, Senate Bill 575, House Bill 240, preempts most regulations of the state, but there's an environmental planning aspect to it. It directs DEP to develop a uniform ordinance and would create a statewide marine debris reduction plan. And there are some carve-outs in here that would allow for the banning or regulation of single-use auxiliary containers on land manned by DEP. The other pair of bills, Senate Bill 766, 6029, has some carve-outs, but it's more of a straightforward preemption bill, preempts nearly all regulation of the state, some exceptions. We support the first set of bills. We oppose the second set of bills. You may have also heard about attempts to fix a piece of legislation that passed last year, Senate Bill 180. Senate Bill 180 was supposed to be all about people rebuilding storm-damaged properties, but all of a sudden, all these new regulations got added that would prohibit local governments from making comprehensive plan changes or establishing environmental protection policies unrelated to storm responses. The legislature, a lot of organizations, a lot of municipalities and counties around the state made a big deal out of this and have been agitating for change to Senate Bill 180. Senate Bill 840, this is by Senator Nick DeSegli. It would narrow it to apply only to storm-damaged properties and policies that would delay rebuilding, while allowing local governments to move forward with unrelated planning decisions. We support this, and it doesn't yet have a House corresponding bill. So hopefully this is going to move. Lawsuits have been filed over this issue. It's been a big concern for municipalities and communities who have been doing long-standing planning work and went to implement what they came up with, and all of a sudden found out they couldn't do so because of Senate Bill 180. So
the preemption theme continues.
Some bills I wanted to include on here, but I neglected to do so. And this has to do with alligator Alcatraz. These are bills regarding state of emergencies. As you know, Governor DeSantis declared several years ago, I believe, a state of emergency in Florida pertaining to immigration. And that is the authority he has leaned on in terms of alligator Alcatraz and some other immigration control attempts. There are a pair of bills this year. It's Senate Bill 700 and House Bill 621. Rep. Fentrice Driscoll is the House sponsor. Senator Carlos Guillermo Smith is the Senate sponsor. Provides that the state of emergency renewed by the governor expires within a specified time frame, authorizes the legislature to extend the state of emergency, but prohibits the time frame from exceeding the end of the next regular session, and prohibits the governor from declaring substantially similar state of emergency under specified conditions. So basically, these bills are an attempt to rein in the authority that Governor DeSantis has and has claimed to do what he's done when it comes to immigration issues.
It sounds like good government in general to have to substantiate why a state of emergency should be continued and what's at stake.
Well, right. Why should, you declare a state of emergency over a period of several, 1 year. Why should that keep being perpetuated year after year? Again, if the issue remains an emergency, and I think we could argue whether this is, but whatever, then why not come back and ask for a new state of emergency? Why not just the perpetuation? Because then it becomes, you're being governed not by the normal process, but you're being governed under the specific powers granted under the Emergency Act. So it's sort of preempts the democratic process. So
yeah. Hey, Gil, if you could go back to the last slide about the sugar bill, the food libel bill. I did look that up, and Senator Keith Truenow is the sponsor in the Senate. He's also a chairman of the Agriculture Committee. And on the House side, it's Representative Alvarez and Johnson. And then co-introducers are Representatives Grow and Randy Maggard, his name again.
Where have we heard that name before? Yes. All right.
All right, so just a reminder to our audience to put questions in the chat. And while we're watching some questions queue up here, we will remind you that you can go to our website, everglades.org, and read about all of the bills we're tracking. You see here on the slide, you can click on that bills we're tracking button, and Gil and our team are updating that in real time throughout session. So on any given day, if there's a new bill that's been filed, you can go there and see what it's all about, what our position is on it. And you can also read the pre-session report that just debuted on our website today, giving you a high-level overview of what we just walked through. And the recording of this session will also be available, and we'll email that out to our supporters. So if you can click ahead here to the next slide. All right, so let's just zoom out for a moment to kind of our North Star priority at Friends of the Everglades. We talked about rescuing the river of grass. I really want to visualize what that looks like, what it means, and why we haven't finished the job in Everglades restoration. There's a lot more work to do. So in the historic Everglades, and many of you know this, but I think it's worth repeating, the water flowed south from Lake Okeechobee in a wide, slow-moving river of grass. It was not discharged east to the St. Lucie River from Lake Okeechobee when the lake got too high, and it had a marsh-like connection to the west, to the Caloosahatchee River. So that's that image there on the left, the historic Everglades. In the altered Everglades, we artificially managed Lake Okeechobee so that when the lake gets high, water is dumped, unfortunately, to the St. Lucie River. We have been spared high-level damaging discharges since really 2018. That's the last year we had very high-level damaging discharges. We did get some unwanted lake discharges that were harmful about a year ago, and we opposed those and they stopped. And then to the west, the Caloosahatchee River also has the same problem, with the added problem that it also needs some dry season flows. And right now, actually, it's been very dry. Those of you who are in the greater Everglades region know that we've been in a period of a few dry months with more dry weather forecasted ahead. And ironically, this Caloosahatchee River is not getting the flows from the lake that it needs right now, because south of the lake, there's those 400,000 or so acres of sugarcane that are drawing on the lake for irrigation. So the restored Everglades, a rescued river of grass, must entail additional public land for water storage and treatment south of the lake so that we can stop those discharges to the St. Lucie River, only give the Caloosahatchee the water it needs, and store and treat clean water so it can go south to Everglades National Park and down to Florida Bay by the Keys. That's the core of our issue at Friends of the Everglades. It's really what we strive to do. When that work is done, we will have succeeded. And of course, there will be these development threats that we have to continue to watchdog. And, if you can go to the next slide, Gil, I'll say that is a big lift, but it is achievable because there is state land acquisition money that voters approved back in 2014 in the Water and Land Legacy Amendment. 75% of voters approved this to send money to the Land Acquisition Trust Fund. We have another 8 or so years of that generating more than $1 billion a year for land acquisition. A lot of this money has been spent for other purposes, arguably not in alignment with the intent of voters when we approved that more than a decade ago. But nonetheless, we're continuing to make this point that the money is available. We know what it would take. It's really about 100,000 acres south of Lake Okeechobee that's still needed, and it would provide immense economic and ecological benefit for Florida. So let's finish the job. And if you go to the next slide, Gil, there's a QR code here where you can sign this petition, scan this QR code, sign the petition to rescue the river of grass so that we can apply that land acquisition money where it would give us the greatest bang for our buck in Florida. All right, so with that said, we are going to take some questions from the audience here. If you're watching us on YouTube or Facebook, you can put your questions directly in the chat and we can pop those in here and get through as many of them as we have. We may just share some comments too. All right, so our first question is from Joe Garofalo. Thank you for tuning in, Joe. Joe says the Gulf of Mexico has been so clear this summer because of the drought. I guess that's a question. I wonder if that takes the pressure off this one-sided legislature. I'll chime in and then curious to hear any thoughts you have, Gil. So we're also seeing that on the East Coast. The St. Lucie River and Indian River Lagoon have had better water quality conditions due to the dry weather, lack of runoff, and also because we haven't had Lake Okeechobee discharges. The lake is lower, so thank God we haven't had those damaging, polluted discharges that trigger toxic algae blooms. I think it does, unfortunately, take immediate pressure off the legislature to act on water quality. I mentioned that 2018 was the last time we had high volume, extremely damaging discharges to both estuaries that caused massive toxic algae in 2018. That happened to be the year that DeSantis was running for governor for the first time, and he campaigned on clean water. And when he took office in early 2019, one of the first things he did was roll out an executive order on the environment. And the follow through on that executive order has been lacking. And I think there's been kind of an out of sight, out of mind philosophy by many in Tallahassee. And we know, those of us who study this know that it's only a matter of time before we have another toxic algae crisis, and that other crises that are less visible continue. So thank you for that excellent question. Please help us continue to bang the drum, continue the awareness. And I think the development threat is what's been more visible in recent years. What would you add to that, Gil?
Well, no, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, I think, there's when the water looks clear, I mean, those of us who sort of follow these issues understand there's still problems, there's still nutrients in the water, but you don't have the very visible crisis like that hitting you right in the face, as was the case in 2013, 2016, 2018. And so people and legislatures think, well, it's fine. It must be fine then. Well, we know it's not fine, which is why we continue to do what we do. It's worth noting too that you mentioned the Gulf of Mexico looks pretty clear. The Caloosahatchee is actually having some problems because the Caloosahatchee needs water from Lake Okeechobee, and it's not getting enough to stave off salinity changes that are causing problems in the estuary. Folks on the Caloosahatchee side have effectively been begging the Army Corps and the South Florida Water Management District, hey, we need more water. And right now they're not getting it. So, and as we continue to get drier and drier here, as we progress into the dry season, that could become sort of an increasing problem. So it's a topic of conversation, but I'm not sure that there's a solution on the horizon. But just goes to show you how dependent we all are on water management, and then how important it is to get that water management right.
Right. And if we had additional land for water storage and treatment south of the lake, that would alleviate these kind of pressure points. So, and a reminder, back in 2013, 2016, 2018, those terrible water years in Florida, it did pressure the legislature to act. And then Senate President Joe Negron advanced a bill, Senate Bill 10, that led to the EAA reservoir. And at the time, there was an understanding and acknowledgement that 60,000 acres were needed south of the lake, public land, to address this issue, to store and clean water. No land was acquired after that. The reservoir that's being built was built on already previously owned state land. So rescuing the river of grass is about finishing the job. And again, we know that Mother Nature is not going to continue to give us a break. One of these years, we're going to be in for it, and we need to continue to push for that solution while funding is available. All right, next question, please. Any take on FWC reform? Hi, Rhonda. Thanks for your question. Gil, have you been tracking that one?
We have some bills on our listed on our tracker that we're keeping an eye on. We haven't really taken a position on them. FWC issues are not something that we've traditionally really been involved in, but we understand there's some concerns out there, so we're going to be following along.
Yeah, I think there's understandable concerns that the Florida Fish and Wildlife Commission is beholden to developers, not listening to the people. Some of the dynamics that we see at play in the Florida Legislature also
I'm going to say, it sounds like the legislature.
Yeah, play out at the FWC level. So we'll do a little more digging around on that, Rhonda. And I know that some of our partners in the Everglades Coalition are tracking that more closely and beyond. Important question. All right, Diane Goldberg. Hello, Diane. Is there a bill to stop allowing septic systems, even improved ones, from being used in flood zones and locations of sea rise that HB 1379 allows? It would also require funding to extend sewer systems. Are you tracking this, Gil?
No, we have not seen any bills that would prohibit septic systems. They would it would require the use of improved septic systems, high efficiency septic systems that do a better job of keeping nutrients out of the groundwater. But no, it's kind of a no-brainer. You'd think there would be more attempts to just outright ban septic systems in certain areas, but no, it's just attempts to ensure that better septic management is taking place in those areas.
Or at the very least, mandatory septic tank inspections, which
right.
used to be a thing at one time in Florida and was repealed. Again, there's some real common sense regulatory measures we can embrace in Florida for the greater good. I know some lawmakers in Tallahassee think regulation is a bad word, but regulation really can benefit us all when it's employed in the vein of common sense.
Right.
All right, we have time for a few more questions probably. All right, we have a question here. I'm not going to attempt that name, so I'll just go straight to the question. Are there any Right to Clean Water updates? Gil, you were involved in the Right to Clean Water effort.
I was. So the campaign is sort of retooling and rethinking its approach and how it might do things differently. There's really nothing public facing yet. And, they're an attempt to sort of say, how can we get the support we need, which is a lot, and with the, everything that's tying us down. So you stay tuned. That effort will be back. I think a lot of people of good faith backed that effort. And then the rules were changed at the last minute, sort of, requiring, exponentially more signatures, and they were under a tight time deadline. So it kind of derailed that drive. But the people behind this are still, we're still committed to this idea that, look, if we're going to have clean water, the legislature really ain't getting it done. And so maybe we need to go over the legislature's head, so to speak, with a constitutional amendment. There's going to be a renewed push, but it admittedly has not started yet. So.
Yes. As a reminder for folks who weren't following, the proposed right to clean water constitutional amendment would have created greater ability for standing in court from everyday citizens who wanted to file a lawsuit to protect clean water in Florida. And unfortunately, the legislature over the last decade or so has made it increasingly hard for citizen-led amendments to be placed on the ballot to change our Constitution. They haven't made it harder for themselves to put amendments, referendums on the ballot, the legislature to put referendum on the ballot. But for citizen-led amendments, it seems like hurdle after hurdle is put into place, which seems to defy the essence of a citizen-led democracy.
Right.
But nonetheless, that's the time we're living in.
Right. Absolutely.
The next question. What is the next scheduled judicial event in the Alligator Alcatraz lawsuit? Thank you for that question, Sam. So we do have a big milestone coming up in court in April, the week of April 6th. There will be oral arguments before the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals and our lawsuit. And as a reminder, Friends of the Everglades are co-plaintiffs with the Center for Biological Diversity, which has great expertise on endangered species, including the Florida panther, whose habitat includes this area where Alligator Alcatraz was built. And then the Miccosukee tribe also joined the case as a co-plaintiff, and we're so grateful to have the tribe's perspective. There are tribal villages and residents very close to Alligator Alcatraz directly impacted. So stay tuned for the week of April 6th, when we'll be back in front of the appeals court. And what's going to happen then is we just filed last week in court. There was a little bit of news coverage. Our argument to restore the preliminary injunction that was in place late last August, early September, halting activity at the site so that the National Environmental Policy Act can be complied with. What does that mean? That means doing the legally mandated study, considering alternatives that might be less damaging, taking public input. Again, none of that happened there. So we'll be working to make our case before the court to restore that injunction. And there's also other action that's pending. We filed a notice of intent to sue under the Endangered Species Act, Clean Water Act, and a law called the National Parks Organic Act. There are a number of environmental protections that have been threatened by this development, and it represents a lot more than just this one site, which, by the way, is surrounded by our country's first national preserve, Big Cypress. This really is kind of a litmus test for other vulnerable areas across our country and this fabric of environmental protections that safeguard our environment as a society. All right, we can take another question from the Indian River Keeper. I think that's Jim Moyer. Hi, Indian River Keeper. Can you draw connections from federal executive orders to Florida bills that have been proposed? That is a good question. Executive orders in particular. Riverkeeper's making us think on our feet here.
Yeah, I can't think of anything pertaining to executive orders, but what does spring to mind was the Supreme Court's recent case on wetlands, the Sackett case, and then the proposed EPA rule that came down that they were taking comment on until this past Monday, I believe it was, that effectively narrows the definition of federally protected waters under the Clean Water Act, would reduce protections to something like 80% of the wetlands in the United States and in Florida. And it's a huge issue. It's a huge problem. And what I've been saying on this is the rationale some legislators have been using as well. Florida, maybe other states aren't this way, but Florida is considered to have fairly robust wetlands protections written into the state constitution, state regulations, whatever. The concern here is that once you strip federal protections from such vast areas, the temptation is going to be at the state level to reduce state level protections in order to open up those areas to development. We're seeing such pressure now this session, such pro-development pressure, such efforts to expedite development, efforts to neuter local government, efforts to cut local citizens out of the process and just push more product through the pipeline faster. If all of a sudden areas that are now protected, if they had federal protections, if all of a sudden those are up for grabs, or the federal government's no longer protecting those areas, why should we protect those areas? They're not, they're not really wetlands, or they're not, crucial wetlands, or whatever the argument will be. The concern here is not necessarily about legislation that's been proposed this year, although lots of terrible legislation has been proposed this year, as you just saw. It is, what will Florida's policy response be to these new EPA regulations? That is something we're going to have to keep a real close eye on in the years to come.
That summarizes it well. Every remaining wetland in Florida really matters to the future viability of our state. The greater Everglades and the state of Florida in general is a state of wetlands that was built on wetlands, and our sordid history is one of drainage and exploitation of those wetlands. And we've learned what dire consequences that has for water quality and for our economy in Florida. Remember, the environment is an economic issue in Florida, where tourism and real estate are major drivers. So Gil mentioned that Supreme Court ruling in the Sackett case, and from that, we're seeing rulemaking and limiting of definition of what is considered a water of the United States under the Clean Water Act. These are things that we're extremely concerned about at Friends of the Everglades, and continuing to weigh in on and raise our voice on. And really, the future viability of Florida is at stake here. All right, I think we might have one more question. Melinda, thanks for tuning in. What does environmentally sensitive smart development look like? Any recent examples in Florida? I think it depends on the area. And I think that's why it's so important that we have local elected officials deciding what their development regulations are, right? So where I'm sitting right now in Martin County, environmentally sensitive smart development is going to look very different from Miami. Friends of the Everglades is still engaged in development issues in Miami. We're co-founders of the Hold the Line Coalition. And in that coalition, there's a lot of talk about transit and building around transit hubs where people can use public transit. Here in Martin County, the conversation's going to be different. It's going to hinge more on protecting wetlands, waterfront buffers, things like that, setbacks from water. So Gil, any thoughts in addition to that?
I can tell you what it doesn't look like. It doesn't look like cutting the public out of the process. In fact, it ought to involve the exact opposite. Particularly if you think you're going to build some 10,000 acre new suburban development right next to existing suburban development, how about we ask our neighbors what they think about this and how we might together work to mitigate impacts? Because there's going to be impacts, okay? Instead, what we're seeing is this attempt at an end run. No, we're not going to, the public won't have an opportunity to engage at all. That's what it doesn't look like. It doesn't look like jumping the urban growth boundary.
Right.
It doesn't, but primarily there ought to be greater attempts to integrate with what is already there, and to ask the people whose lives are going to be affected by this development, look, how do you think we should do it? What is your take on this? Public engagement can actually create a better project, and can create one that everybody can live with, perhaps happily, but we're doing it the exact opposite way. This session, above all the ones that I've been watching, this session is a damn the torpedoes, full speed ahead, ramming speed sort of thing. It's a full court blitz. It's a full court press. We've got dozens of terrible bills, all taking the wrong approach to smart growth. And that's going to be a problem for Florida if these go through.
You mentioned urban development boundaries. I would add that smart development is only moving urban development boundaries when there is a thoroughly vetted exceedance of capacity within the boundary. Those boundaries exist for good reason. It's not that they're set in stone forever. It's that they should only be moved when the statistics, the data justifies it. And the public really gets these issues. We've seen it here in Martin County and beyond. The public has become really well informed on development, what sound development looks like, what it doesn't. Make sure they stay engaged in the process, to Gil's good point. Okay, that was our final question. So to recap, legislative session begins tomorrow in Tallahassee. Gil is going to be even busier than he already is, tracking bills along with our team at Friends of the Everglades. We are going to be in touch with you, flag bills that you can weigh in on. Make sure you're signed up for our emails at everglades.org if you want to get those alerts. Also, check out the very good pre-session report that Gil crafted summarizing the issues we just talked about. And we'll come back to you in a month for a mid-session update. Tune in then. Come back with your questions, please. We'll let you know where these things stand, how we can make a difference. And then we'll come back at the end of session as well and let you know where things landed. So I want to thank everyone for tuning in today. Gil, any final words before we sign off?
Stay tuned, stay engaged, help us win some victories this session too.
All right. Thanks, Gil. Thanks, everyone. We'll be in touch.